On the morning of the 20th of August, 1992, at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, the royal household sat down to breakfast with the daily papers, as it had every summer morning for a century and a half. Present at the castle as a guest of the Queen was the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, 32 years old, mother of two of the Queen's granddaughters. On the front page of the Daily Mirror that morning was a photograph of the Duchess, topless, at a villa in Saint-Tropez, having her foot attended to by a man who wasn't her husband. A Buckingham Palace spokesman had confirmed the previous afternoon that she was at the castle. She was in the building when it landed. Her own memoir records the moment. It would be accurate to report that the porridge was getting cold. Eyes wide and mouths ajar, the adults were flipping through the Daily Mirror. Royal biographer Penny Junor described what followed in terms that left nothing open for interpretation. The family came down for breakfast, and there was Fergie in this shocking scene. And that was the end. The headline across the front page read, "Fergie's Stolen Kisses." Inside, the Mirror ran 7 to 10 pages of photographs taken in mid-August at a poolside villa belonging to British businessman Charles Smallbone, captured by Italian freelance photographer Dino Angeli using a telephoto lens from public paths on the surrounding hillside. The man in the photographs was John Bryan, her financial advisor, and during the separation, her boyfriend. The formal separation from Prince Andrew had been announced 5 months earlier, in March. The photographs were August. But somewhere between the two, the palace made a decision it wouldn't make official for another 18 years. This is the story of what was in the file they were already keeping. One convention before we begin. Where the record contains documented fact, you will hear it as fact. Where it contains allegation or reported detail from court-adjacent processes that hasn't been independently confirmed, you will hear it described as such. That distinction matters here. It will hold throughout. Sarah Ferguson was neither the victim of the coldest machine in Europe nor the simple author of every disaster in her file. She was the long-running beneficiary of a rescue economy built on royal adjacency as collateral. And the story that matters is why the economy kept paying out until late 2025, when it stopped, all at once, in the space of 5 weeks. Sarah Margaret Ferguson was born on the 15th of October, 1959, the second daughter of Major Ronald Ferguson and Susan Wright. Her father had served in the Life Guards, left the regiment, and moved into polo management, first at the Guards Polo Club, eventually as Prince Charles's polo manager. The family seat was Dummer Down Farm in Hampshire, with its brick and cedar stables and a 2-acre paddock. The social world it sat inside was the British equestrian and polo circuit, a milieu where performance of ease wasn't optional. The people in that world didn't discuss anxiety. They projected confidence, competed in it, and formed their children in it. The relationship that ended her parents' marriage began in the summer of 1972. The Fergusons took a holiday to the Ionian island of Corfu and brought with them a friend, Hector Barrantes, an Argentine polo player. By late 1973, her mother had returned from a stay in Argentina. The family formally divorced in 1974. Susan married Barrantes in 1975 and moved to his cattle ranch in Trenque-Lauquen on the Argentine Pampas. Sarah was approximately 14 or 15 when Dummer Down became a single-parent home. In her own memoirs, she does not frame her mother's departure as abandonment. She writes about respecting how Barrantes had dealt with Mum leaving, a sentence calibrated to manage the cost of the thing rather than expose it. Elsewhere, she noted that at the age of 12, as the marriage began to break down, she had developed an eating disorder and turned to overeating for comfort. That detail appears almost in passing. It shouldn't. What the record around this period confirms isn't a dramatic rupture, but a structural adjustment. Ronald Ferguson remarried in 1976. Sarah attended Hurst Lodge School in Ascot, where staff described her as courageous, bubbly, and outgoing. She worked as a chalet girl, a waitress, a cleaner. She completed Queen's Secretarial College at 18. She worked in public relations firms in London, then at a publishing company. She dated a stockbroker. She dated a motor racing manager more than 20 years her senior. What she was building, across all of this, was a version of confidence that didn't require its foundations to be visible. The horsey set that raised her had no use for visible foundations. You rode well, or you didn't. You presented ease, or you didn't. The machinery of the emotion was always underneath, out of frame. That skill would look, from the outside, like exactly what the palace needed in the summer of 1986. The palace was wrong about that. It would take about 18 months to discover it. The engagement was announced on the 19th of March, 1986. The couple had known each other since childhood, meeting occasionally at polo matches, and had been reacquainted at Royal Ascot the previous year. Before the public announcement, Ferguson had accompanied Diana, Princess of Wales, on an official tour of Prince Andrew's ship, HMS Brazen. Andrew is reported to have designed the engagement ring himself. They married at Westminster Abbey on the 23rd of July, 1986. Ferguson became HRH, the Duchess of York. The initial press coverage distinguished her from Diana in terms that felt like relief, natural, unguarded, refreshingly ordinary. She passed her private pilot's license in 1987, reportedly funded as a wedding gift by Lord Hanson. She undertook a 25-day tour of Canada. She gave interviews that made the tabloids laugh with, rather than at her. Her own account of those months, from Finding Sarah, is precise about what she understood the arrangement to be. As man and wife, we were the Duke and Duchess of York, and together we seemed an unbeatable team. Andrew was a dashing naval officer working on active duty. I aspired to be a... That sentence does not finish in the available excerpt, but the incompleteness is itself instructive. What she aspired to be was a duchess. What the institution needed from a duchess, it turned out, was something more specific: a function, a shape, a set of behaviors that fit its purposes. By the spring of 1988, 2 years into the marriage, it was clear she wasn't that shape. Andrew's naval career required him away from home for stretches that Ferguson later calculated as leaving them together for approximately 40 days a year in the first 5 years. She was performing the role of the Duchess of York largely without the Duke. The press that had called her refreshing found in her joie de vivre a target it could work with in different ways. A 1988 California royal tour was described by 2 British newspapers as a brash, vulgar, excessive, weak-humored exhibition by 2 royals. City officials in Los Angeles called the criticism awful and said the couple had fulfilled their duties. The journalists knew their readership. By January 1992, photographs of Ferguson with Texas socialite Steve Wyatt, including one showing him with her infant daughter Princess Eugenie, had appeared in the press. On the 19th of March 1992, the 6th anniversary of the engagement, Buckingham Palace announced that lawyers for the Duke and Duchess of York had begun discussions about a formal separation. The same announcement confirmed that Ferguson would no longer undertake public engagements on behalf of the Queen. Washington Post coverage from the following day quoted palace sources briefing that Ferguson was unfit for royal life. The BBC noted that the knives are out for Fergie at the palace. The official record was cool and specific. The tabloid coverage wasn't. The photographs were still 5 months away. Saint-Tropez, mid-August, 1992. A villa belonging to British businessman Charles Smallbone, set above the mountains on the French Riviera. Sarah Ferguson is there with John Bryan, described uniformly at the time by the British press as her Texan financial advisor, though Brian himself has objected to this characterization in interviews, stating that he is from New York. He was her financial advisor and her boyfriend during the separation. Their 2-year-old daughter, Princess Eugenie, is in some of the photographs. The photographs were taken by Italian freelancer Dino Angeli, using a telephoto lens from public paths surrounding the property. Brian kissing Ferguson's foot, Brian lying on top of her by the pool. Ferguson, topless. Brian's later account frames the foot contact as playful. I wasn't sucking her toes, I was kissing them. And Ferguson's memoir describes it as a Cinderella game, him pretending to try on the slipper, her playing the part. The photograph does not carry that caption. The photograph will be on the front page of the Daily Mirror by Thursday morning. On the Tuesday before publication, Brian rang Ferguson at Balmoral. "I'm afraid they've got photographs of our trip to France," he told her. He then contacted royal correspondent Richard Kay and asked for an early copy of the paper. In Kay's later written account, he brought the Mirror to Brian's apartment in London just after midnight. A call came through on the private line. It was Fergie on her private line from Balmoral, Kay wrote. Ever the smooth talker, Brian promised her everything would be fine, but I could see in his face that he didn't really believe it. In a few short hours, those pictures were going to be on the breakfast room sideboard in the Queen's castle. The Buckingham Palace spokesman had already confirmed her location to UPI. She's at Balmoral Castle, where she has been since Monday. By Thursday morning, Thursday, the 20th of August, 1992, the paper was on the breakfast table, 7 to 10 pages inside. Front page headline, Fergie's Stolen Kisses. The Sun and the Daily Record published the same images the same morning. Her 2-year-old daughter was visible in some of the frames. It would be accurate to report that the porridge was getting cold. Eyes wide and mouths ajar, the adults were flipping through the Daily Mirror. Ingrid Seward, editor of Majesty magazine and among the closest royal commentators to events of that period, recorded the Queen's reaction in terms that haven't been substantially disputed. The Queen was furious. Absolutely furious. I think partly because she loved Fergie so much. She just couldn't believe Fergie could have been so stupid to allow this to happen. A separate account circulated of Prince Philip throwing the paper in front of Ferguson and walking out. It can't be verified as direct testimony. What multiple sources do confirm, including later accounts attributed to Seward, is that Philip told the Queen he wouldn't be in the same building as her. His reported position: she had brought shame on the family, and he was finished with her presence. Ferguson wasn't invited back to Balmoral for another 16 years. When she eventually returned in 2008, palace sources indicated it was arranged for periods when Philip wasn't there. The palace issued one public statement on the 20th of August. "We strongly disapprove of the publication of photographs taken in such circumstances." Read that sentence carefully. It defends her privacy. It condemns the intrusive photography. It says nothing about Ferguson's conduct, her position, her character, or her future as a member of the institution. Ferguson's memoir records separately that when she subsequently sought to have the palace's press secretary intercede with the Press Complaints Commission to block further publication, she was refused. By the 23rd of August, UPI was reporting, Duchess of York leaves Queen's holiday home. She had driven 50 miles to Aberdeen Airport with her daughters and their nanny. The Telegraph confirmed she was forced to return to London that day. Now here is what must be stated carefully, because accuracy demands it. The palace didn't hold a meeting in August 1992 and document a formal decision to withdraw institutional support from Sarah Ferguson. There is no minuted decision, no dated directive, no policy paper in the public record. What the record shows is a trajectory. The palace issued a privacy statement and then said nothing more. It didn't defend her conduct. It didn't mount a press briefing in her favor. The structures of working royal support, official communications, press office assistance, inclusion in the program of engagements simply ceased. Biographers, royal correspondence, and the 15 years of documented events that followed all converge on the same reading. The institution that had managed 6 years of scrapes, debts, and controversies made a private judgment in August of 1992, and it never publicly reversed it. This is the record's trajectory. It isn't a minute of a meeting. But trajectories, followed at sufficient distance, become as legible as policy. The formal separation had been announced in March. The divorce would be finalized in May 1996. But between those two dates, something more consequential had already happened. The palace had stopped catching her. By the time the divorce was finalized on the 30th of May 1996, Sarah Ferguson's overdraft at Coutts & Company stood at approximately £4.2 million. The New York Times reported in February 1996 that she owed somewhere between $3 million and $4.5 million. What happened inside those numbers is documented more precisely than is usually reported. In April 1994, Coutts issued a demand for £500,000 to be repaid within 14 days. Andrew Lowney's research into this period establishes that Queen Elizabeth II personally intervened to settle that specific demand. This isn't widely known because it does not fit either available narrative, neither the one in which the palace abandoned Ferguson entirely, nor the one in which she earned her way out alone. The Queen intervened. By November 1995, debts had crossed $5 million by Ferguson's own account. She required bank approval to write even modest checks. The interest was accruing at roughly £750 per day. In 1996, Buckingham Palace issued a formal statement. The Duchess's financial affairs are no longer Her Majesty's concern, but matters which the Duchess of York must discuss and resolve with her bankers and other financial advisors. The Queen was formally on record as no longer responsible. She had just, 2 years earlier, personally settled a bank demand. This is what institutional distance looks like from the inside. The divorce settlement is disputed in the public record. Ferguson told interviewers she received essentially nothing, that she lived off her daughter's trust funds. Senior palace officials told the Sunday Telegraph that the actual package included £350,000 in cash, £500,000 from the Queen to buy a house for her and the children, and a monthly allowance based on Andrew's naval salary, with a total estimated at £500,000 by 2010. The Daily Mail's detailed 2025 analysis of her finances places the settlement at £3 million when all components are included. Whatever the sum, it didn't clear the debt. The Coutts overdraft remained. The palace's formal distancing statement was real. What was also real, and this is what defines the rescue economy as a system, was that the name had not been devalued. The Duchess of York brand still converted. In January 1997, Ferguson flew to New York and stood at a press conference to announce herself as the United States spokeswoman for Weight Watchers International. The fee reported by multiple outlets ranges from approximately $1 million annually to $1.7 million, the higher figure confirmed by The Guardian as of 2001. The arrangement ran for approximately 11 years. The connection between the product and the spokesperson was explicit. She had lost 4 stone on a calorie reduction program with personal trainer Josh Saltzman and was being paid to say so. But the New York Times Magazine, in February 1997, named what was actually being sold. She was, the paper said, commodifying the prestige of the British royal family and was breaking new ground as the first royal to actively promote commercial products for personal financial gain. That is an accurate description of the mechanism. The title, Duchess of York, was the collateral. Not a contractual requirement spelled out in Weight Watchers' legal documents, but the entire basis of why Weight Watchers wanted her. Without the title, they could have hired any celebrity who had lost weight. With the title, they had a piece of the world's most recognizable institution available for use in American supermarket aisles. Ocean Spray paid approximately £500,000 for a 30-second television commercial. She reportedly required 102 takes to deliver the line. Wedgwood paid approximately $750,000, around £519,000 at the time, to have her promote their china in America. Olympus Cameras. QVC, a syndicated newspaper column. The Washington Speakers Bureau listed her for speaking engagements at around $55,000 per appearance, where she spoke about overcoming adversity, which was, by then, both her professional subject and the only commercial territory she had. Budgie the Little Helicopter had begun earlier, first published by Simon & Schuster in September 1989, with 4 further titles and a 39-episode animated series on CITV that ran from January 1994. The overall merchandise deals were estimated at £8 million, of which Ferguson received approximately £1.6 million. The TV deal was reportedly negotiated at the Cannes Film Festival by John Bryan, the same John Bryan whose photograph had run to 10 pages in the Daily Mirror 3 years earlier. Her autobiography, My Story, was published in November 1996 for an advance of approximately £800,000. It reached the top 3 on American bestseller lists. After the divorce, she moved temporarily to Remenda Lodge in Surrey, before eventually returning to Royal Lodge, Windsor, a property on the Crown Estate with a lease running until 2078, where she and Andrew continued to live together, separate but adjacent, for years. Royal Lodge represented a housing cost of 0. The picture that emerges from these years isn't of a woman being punished or rescued in any simple sense. It's of a system working as systems do. The palace had formally exited her finances, but the brand the palace had originally conferred continued to generate commercial revenue. Every contract was a conversion of institutional adjacency into cash. The institution had closed the rescue hatch from its end. The market had opened a parallel one. There is a comment that circulates beneath videos about this period. Approximately 67 people have indicated agreement with a version of the same sentiment, that ordinary people who fall into debt absorb their losses without external rescue, that no mechanism exists for them, that watching this particular woman receive catch after catch is its own kind of accounting. The observation isn't wrong. It isn't yet complete. The economy wasn't built on sentiment. It was built on value. Her name had value. Theirs didn't. The machine was never sentimental. It was transactional. The first rescue economy ran through the 1990s and into the early 2000s. The second collapsed in 2009. Hartmore LLC, the American lifestyle company Ferguson had founded in 2006 to support her work in publishing, media, and public speaking, filed for administration in 2009 with debts of £630,000. By August 2010, press estimates placed total debts near £5 million. Separately, the DOJ files released in 2025 and 2026 contain emails, reported by The Guardian, the BBC, and multiple news organizations, and carrying allegation status where they haven't been independently authenticated, that indicate Ferguson was in contact with Jeffrey Epstein throughout this period. In an email dated October 2009, she reportedly wrote to him, "I urgently need £20,000 for rent today. The landlord has threatened to go to the newspapers if I don't pay. Any brainwaves?" The authenticity of the emails hasn't been independently confirmed, and appearing in the Epstein files does not indicate wrongdoing. On approximately the 18th of May 2010, Mazir Mahmood of the News of the World conducted an undercover sting operation. Mahmood, who had spent 20 years posing as businessmen, sheikhs, and Indian entrepreneurs to trap public figures for tabloid exposure, arranged to meet Ferguson in a flat in Mayfair. He posed as a wealthy businessman. She was there. The footage showed what happened. She offered access to Prince Andrew, who was at that point the UK's special representative for international trade and investment, for £500,000. As down payment, she accepted approximately £27,600 in cash, about $48,000 at the exchange rate of the day. On camera, she said, £500,000 when you can, to me, open doors. The News of the World published the footage on Sunday, the 23rd of May, 2010. Andrew's office issued a categorical denial of any knowledge. Ferguson issued a public apology the same day. On the Oprah Winfrey Show the following week, she said she had been drinking at the time, that she had initially sought around $38,000 to help a friend in difficulty, and that the sum had grown as her own debts had pressed in. She described herself, in that interview, as having been in the gutter. In Finding Sarah, published the following year, she set it down plainly. In May 2010, my life spiraled into a private hell when I was caught unawares on a hidden camera accepting money. I apologized publicly for my serious lapse of judgment. The phrase serious lapse of judgment is accurate and insufficient simultaneously. The lapse was real. So is the structure it reveals. The rescue economy's commercial iteration had maintained a careful distance from the institution. Weight Watchers wasn't Andrew. Ocean Spray wasn't the palace. The deals leveraged her adjacency to the crown while keeping the transaction at arm's length from anything that could embarrass the institution directly. In the Mayfair flat, that distance collapsed to zero. The asset she was selling wasn't the Duchess of York brand. It was a meeting with her ex-husband. The brand and the institution had always been entangled. This was the first time the entanglement became legally proximate. Mahmoud was convicted in October 2016 of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice in a separate case, the Tulisa Kontostavlos trial, and jailed for 15 months. Ferguson launched a £25 million damages claim against News UK. The claim failed. The filmed footage, the cash, the recorded offer, none of these were disturbed by Mahmoud's conviction, because the evidence existed independently of his testimony, and Ferguson had never disputed the facts. Now to the payment that must be handled with the precision the subject requires. In 2011, a debt that Ferguson owed to a former personal assistant, Johnny O'Sullivan, for unpaid wages, was settled by a payment of £15,000 made by Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein had, at that point, served a 13-month sentence in Florida for soliciting sex from a person under the age of 18. This isn't allegation. Ferguson acknowledged the payment herself. In March 2011, in an interview with the Evening Standard, she said, "I abhor pedophilia and any sexual abuse of children, and know that this was a gigantic error of judgment on my behalf. I am just so contrite I can't say." She said she would repay the money when she could, and would have nothing to do with Epstein again. In the weeks after that interview, and this is reported detail from emails released by the U.S. Department of Justice, carrying allegation status, she sent Epstein a message in which she described him as a steadfast, generous, and supreme friend to her and her family, and apologized for linking him publicly to sexual abuse. Her representative stated the email was written on the advice of her lawyers, following a legal threat from Epstein after her public comments. The picture the full documented period draws, the acknowledged £15,000, the reported October 2009 email asking for £20,000 for rent, the earlier reported emails asking for business advice while he was incarcerated in Florida, points toward a financial dependency on Epstein that was considerably broader than the figure she publicly acknowledged. The scope of that dependency can't be stated as confirmed fact because the relevant documents remain disputed and the courts haven't settled them. What can be stated is this. By 2010 and 2011, the rescue economy had sourced its most recent catch from the doorstep of a convicted sex offender. The adjacency mechanism that had converted royal proximity into commercial value had reached, in its most desperate iteration, a man for whom other people's financial desperation was a professional instrument. The palace said nothing public about the sting. Andrew's office issued its denial and nothing further. The institution held its distance. That is the shape of its defense in this period. Silence, not support. 3 years after the Evening Standard interview, the debts had been substantially cleared. By press accounts, Andrew orchestrated a repayment operation that settled them at approximately 25 pence in the pound. Ferguson continued working. A 22-book deal with Australian publisher Serenity Press, television appearances, the beginnings of what would become the patronage work that defined her public profile in the 2010s and early 2020s. In June 2019, Andrew arranged a private tour of Buckingham Palace for executives from Pegasus Group Holdings, a U.S. cryptocurrency mining company that had engaged Ferguson as brand ambassador in a deal potentially worth £1.4 million. Court documents showed she earned over £200,000 from Pegasus and stood to gain a £1.2 million bonus and company equity. The executives were driven from their Knightsbridge hotel to the palace in Andrew's car. That evening, they dined with Ferguson, Andrew, and Princess Beatrice. The project collapsed. It acquired 615 of a planned 16,000 solar-powered mining units and generated $33,779 in cryptocurrency. The mechanism, at its most recent iteration, still ran along the same rail. Royal access, arranged through royal infrastructure, converted into commercial engagement fees. Then came the autumn of 2025. On the 21st of September, The Guardian reported the existence of an email from Ferguson to Jeffrey Epstein, dated the 26th of April 2011, weeks after her public disavowal, in which she described him as a steadfast, generous, and supreme friend to her and her family. Her representatives confirmed the email existed and said it had been written following a legal threat from Epstein after her public comments, on the advice of her lawyers. The following day, Monday, the 22nd of September 2025, 7 charities announced they were severing ties with Ferguson. Julia's House, a children's hospice, stated that the reported correspondence made it inappropriate for her to continue as a patron. The Natasha Allergy Research Foundation, founded in 2019 by Nadim and Tanya Ednan-Laperouse after the death of their daughter Natasha, who died on the 17th of July 2016, aged 15, from an anaphylactic reaction to a pret-a-manger baguette that contained unlabeled sesame. The charity that had campaigned for what became Natasha's law on food labeling also ended its association with Ferguson. She had been a NARF patron since 2019. Prevent Breast Cancer withdrew. The Teenage Cancer Trust ended an association that had run for 35 years. 4 more organizations followed before the week was out. The word each of these organizations used was inappropriate, not financially damaging, not reputationally unsustainable, inappropriate. In institutional language, that word means the calculation has been made and the cost exceeds any possible benefit. These weren't commercial partners running a brand exercise. They were charities built around sick children, food safety, cancer patients, hospice care. The kind of organizations for which the word inappropriate carries the same finality as a bank demanding repayment within 14 days. In October, ITV removed Ferguson from the guest lists for Loose Women and This Morning. Insiders confirmed no future appearances were planned. On the 19th and 20th of October, Andrew canceled a planned 66th birthday party for Ferguson at Royal Lodge. Staff and guests had already been invited. No senior royals sent public birthday wishes. On the 21st of October, she removed Duchess of York from her social media handles. On the 30th of October, 2025, Buckingham Palace issued a formal statement. The statement named Prince Andrew. It announced that the king had initiated a formal process to remove his style, titles, and honors, and that formal notice had been served to surrender the lease on Royal Lodge, with a move to alternative private accommodation to follow. The lease on Royal Lodge runs until 2078. She had lived there, in one arrangement or another, since 2008. The statement didn't name Sarah Ferguson. Her displacement was a consequence. She appeared in the document's practical effects, not in its text. The institution that had managed her file for nearly 4 decades didn't include her name in the 200-word document that closed it. By February 2026, Sarah's Trust, the charity she had founded in 2020, dedicated to humanitarian and environmental causes, was formally closed and removed from the public register of charities. From the 22nd of September to the 30th of October 2025, 5.5 weeks. The charities went first, then the invitations, then the house. A question circulates about all of this, and it deserves a direct answer. Beatrice and Eugenie are both married, both connected, both demonstrably capable of navigating the world outside the palace's formal protection. Princess Beatrice married Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, a property developer, at a private ceremony at Windsor on the 17th of July 2020. Princess Eugenie married Jack Brooksbank, who has worked in the hospitality industry, in October 2018 at Windsor. Both daughters retain their HRH titles. The question that circulates is, why don't they rescue her? The answer requires precision about what was taken. What the palace withdrew in October 2025 wasn't money, and it wasn't housing in itself. It was convertibility. The specific thing the rescue economy had run on for 30 years, the designation Sarah, Duchess of York, attached to a living institution, generating commercial leverage because of what the name implied about proximity to the crown, was the mechanism. The name's value resided entirely in what the institution was willing, through its silence and its tolerance, to endorse by association. Beatrice and Eugenie hold their HRH designations through bloodline, not through marriage. The palace didn't strip them of anything. Their titles aren't dependent on Andrew's, but those titles can't transfer to their mother. They can't restore the palace's institutional endorsement of the Duchess of York name, because that endorsement was never theirs to give. Their financial resources, whatever they are, can't purchase back the one thing the machine took, its own willingness to let the name convert. The daughters understood this. The record contains no public statement from either of them about their mother's situation in October 2025. That silence isn't cruelty. It's the precise form that institutional survival takes in this family. They retained what they could retain. They couldn't give their mother what the machine had decided to withhold. In the end, it took the palace fewer than 200 words. 33 years after the photographs on the breakfast table at Balmoral, the statement of the 30th of October 2025 closed the file it had been writing in silences since August of 1992. The charities first, then the invitations, then the house. The sequence ran 5.5 weeks. The document that ended it named Andrew. Call her the victim of the coldest machine in Europe. She was followed, photographed from public paths by telephoto lens, her private arrangements weaponized in a global press cycle while she sat in the Queen's castle. She was separated from her husband while he spent 40 days a year at home. She was left with multi-million-pound debts and a formal palace statement confirming the institution considered those debts no longer its concern. She was excluded from a wedding, and another, and a coronation. All of that is documented. All of it's in the file. Call her the author of her own file. She accepted £27,600 in cash in a Mayfair flat on a recorded offer to sell access to a member of the royal family. She acknowledged accepting £15,000 from a convicted sex offender toward a personal debt. The DOJ files, carrying allegation status, not confirmed record, suggest a financial relationship with Epstein that extended across years and sums well beyond what she publicly admitted. She sent a Cinderella to sit at poolside in Saint-Tropez while her 2-year-old daughter was photographed in the frame. All of that is documented. All of it's also in the file. The documented record of 4 decades does not allow those two answers to be cleanly separated. She was simultaneously a woman the system failed and a woman who made choices that compounded the failure. The rescue economy does not resolve that paradox. It names the structure that ran alongside both truths across 3.5 decades. And the structure is the story, because the structure was never available to the people watching from outside. By the count the documented record supports, the machine caught her roughly a dozen times. Direct palace financial intervention, post-divorce royal housing, A commercial empire built on the convertibility of a title the institution continued to tacitly endorse. A debt repayment operation orchestrated through her ex-husband's office. Access to a palace furnished for a cryptocurrency pitch. She once said she wanted to be judged on her own merits. The record now runs to 4 decades, and it shows a woman the machine rescued and defended in different proportions across different years. And in October 2025, stopped doing either. Somewhere out there are the people from the comment sections, the ones who work hard, who are content with small lives, who absorb their losses and don't have a name that converts into commercial collateral. The machine never rescued any of them. It was never built to. It was built to protect the name, and on the 30th of October 2025, it finally decided her name was no longer it.